The moment Avianna walked into the Monday morning all-hands meeting and saw him standing at the front of the conference room, her coffee nearly slipped through her fingers. It was him. The same man she had thrown a glass of water in the face of at the Harrington Hotel Gala 48 hours ago. She stood frozen in the doorway while 23 of her colleagues filed past her, finding their seats, pulling out laptops, chatting about the weekend. Nobody noticed her face had gone completely white. Nobody noticed that her legs had stopped working. Nobody noticed except him, and the small controlled smile that moved across his mouth told her that he had noticed from the moment she walked in. "Good morning," he said to the room. "I'm Calloway Reed. As of today, I'm the new Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Group." Avianna sat down in the nearest empty chair and stared at the table. She had worked at Meridian for 6 years. She had given those 6 years everything. Late nights, weekends, 3 vacations she never took. One relationship that ended because her then-boyfriend said she loved her job more than she loved him. He wasn't entirely wrong. She was the senior brand strategist. She had built the Meridian Lifestyle division from a department of 2 into a team of 11, and she had been told, not once, not twice, but 4 separate times by the outgoing CEO, Bernard Walsh, that she was being considered for the VP of marketing position that had been vacant for 8 months. Nobody told her they were bringing in an outside CEO. Nobody told her anything. She found out at 8:47 on a Friday morning when HR sent a company-wide email announcing that Bernard Walsh was retiring effective immediately and that a transition announcement would follow the following Monday. 40 minutes later, her friend and work neighbor Petra, no, not Petra, she'd have to stop using that name, her friend Waverly, who sat 2 desks over and had sources in every department including the mailroom, leaned across the partition and said, "Girl, I heard it's someone from Crestfield Capital." Crestfield Capital, a private equity firm out of Boston that had acquired a minority stake in Meridian the previous year. Everyone knew what that meant. Everyone had spent the Friday afternoon pretending to work while actually refreshing LinkedIn and updating their resumes. Avianna had not updated her resume. She had sat at her desk until 7 in the evening telling herself to stay calm, that 6 years of results would speak for themselves, that whoever came in would see what she had built and recognize its value. She had spent Saturday convincing herself she was fine. Saturday night, she had let Waverly drag her to the Harrington Hotel Gala for the Whitmore Foundation's annual fundraiser. It was the kind of event Avianna usually avoided. Overpriced champagne, people networking with a desperation they tried to disguise as socializing, every conversation a transaction. But Waverly had gotten the tickets through a friend and said they needed a night out. And Avianna had agreed mostly because she needed to get out of her own head. It had worked for a while. The venue was beautiful. The Harrington Ballroom had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. And the light that evening was that particular shade of deep gold that made everything look more significant than it was. Avianna wore the burgundy dress she'd bought for her cousin's wedding and kept in the back of her closet, and Waverly wore green sequins and announced that they were going to have the best night they'd had in months. They found their table, they ate the dinner, they had 2 glasses of champagne each, and for approximately 90 minutes Avianna forgot about Meridian, forgot about Bernard Walsh and his retirement, forgot about Crestfield Capital and what it meant. Then a man at the adjacent table leaned over to Waverly and said something that made Waverly's face go very still in the way that meant she was trying to decide whether to laugh or respond. Avianna had turned to look. He was tall, dark suit, the kind of easy confidence that came either from old money or from never having been told no. He was smiling at Waverly in the way certain men smiled at women in rooms like this, like he was doing her a favor by paying attention. "I'm sorry," Avianna said before she had fully decided to speak. "Did she look interested?" The man glanced at her, not annoyed, which surprised her, more amused. "I was just introducing myself." "She's been giving you her back for 10 minutes. That's not an invitation." "Avi," Waverly said quietly. "No, it's fine," the man said. "Point taken." He turned back to his own table, and Avianna turned back to hers, and that should have been the end of it. Except that 20 minutes later she was coming back from the restroom, and he was standing in the corridor outside on his phone, and he looked up when she passed and said, "For what it's worth, you were right." She stopped. "I know." He laughed, a real one, not the polished one from the ballroom. "Calloway Reed," he said, and extended his hand. "Avianna Cole," she said, and shook it. They ended up talking in that corridor for nearly 30 minutes. She didn't plan it. He asked what she did, and she told him brand strategy, and he asked which company, and she said Meridian Group. And something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't read, and he said that was interesting work. She asked what he did. He said he worked in investments. She asked which firm. He said he was between things at the moment. She believed him. He was smart. She didn't expect that, or she expected it, but not in the way it materialized. He wasn't performing intelligence. He was just using it, asking her actual questions about the Meridian Lifestyle division, about the campaign she'd run the previous fall that had doubled their consumer engagement numbers, about what she thought the brand's biggest untapped market was. She told him. She always talked too much when someone asked her real questions. At some point, Waverly appeared in the corridor with a look on her face that Avianna recognized as her "I am going to want full details" look. And Avianna excused herself and rejoined the party. She had not thought about it as anything other than a good conversation. That was the truth. The Monday morning meeting lasted 45 minutes. Calloway Reed spoke for the first 15. He talked about vision, about the company's trajectory, about respecting what had been built and building on it. He was measured. He did not say the words efficiency or restructuring, which Avianna had been dreading, but he also did not say anything specific enough to be reassuring. He said he would be spending his first 2 weeks meeting with department heads and senior staff individually, that he believed in understanding a company before changing it. When the meeting ended, Avianna's colleague Darnell fell into step beside her in the hallway and said, "Seems decent." Avianna said. "You okay? You looked like you were going to be sick in there." "I'm fine. I just didn't sleep great." She got to her desk and sat down and opened her laptop and stared at her inbox without reading any of it. Her assistant, Bryce, appeared at the edge of her workspace. "You have the Pinnacle campaign deck review at 10 and the Q3 metrics call at 2. Also, Mr. Reed's EA just sent a calendar invite. He wants to meet with you Thursday at 3. "Fine," Avianna said. "Accept it." Waverly appeared approximately 4 minutes later, perching on the edge of the desk with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting to say something since Saturday night. "That's him," Waverly said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, the man from the Gala. Yes, Waverly. The man you lectured about reading social cues." "I didn't lecture, Avianna. You told him she was giving him her back." Avianna pressed her eyes shut briefly. "I know what I said. And then you talked to him for half an hour in the hallway, I know. And now he's your CEO. I'm aware." Waverly sat with this for a moment and then she said, "Okay, but you have to admit that's a little." "Waverly. I'm just saying, go back to your desk." The week was long. Avianna threw herself into the Pinnacle campaign with the particular focus she had always been able to summon when she needed to stop thinking about something else. The campaign was for a new product line, a collaboration with a sustainable fashion house that Avianna had spent 4 months pitching to Bernard Walsh before he finally greenlit it. It was good work. She knew it was good work. She also knew that a new CEO meant nothing was safe until it was signed, and she ran the numbers again and rebuilt 2 of the slides and had Bryce send the revised deck to the whole team by Wednesday evening. Thursday arrived faster than she wanted it to. She wore the charcoal blazer she always wore when she needed to feel competent, which Waverly had once told her was her business blazer, and which Avianna had not denied. She arrived at the executive floor 3 minutes early and was shown into the corner office by a woman named Gia, who had the efficient manner of someone who had worked with difficult men for a long time and knew how to manage them. Calloway Reed stood when she entered. She hadn't expected that. Men in that position didn't usually stand. "Avianna," he said. "Thanks for coming up." "Of course," she said, and sat in the chair across the desk and folded her hands and waited. He looked at her with a steadiness that was harder to manage than she wanted it to be. In the corridor at the Harrington, he had seemed like an interesting stranger. In this office, in this chair, he was her CEO, and the conversations at the Gala sat between them like something neither of them had named yet. "I read the Pinnacle campaign deck last night," he said. She hadn't known he'd already seen it. "And? It's excellent. The consumer insight work is the strongest I've seen in this sector in a while." She let herself feel that for exactly 1 second. "Thank you. I also read the Q3 and Q4 reports from the last 2 years. The lifestyle division's growth is consistent and measurable. You built something real here. We have a strong team. You have a strong team because you built one." He paused. "I want you to know I'm not here to dismantle what works." She looked at him directly. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes. Did you know I worked at Meridian, at the Gala?" He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, considering. "I knew the name of the company you mentioned when you told me what you did, and you knew you were taking this role. I knew it was likely, yes." She absorbed that. "You could have said something." "I could have," he agreed. "I didn't want it to change the conversation. It would have." "I know. That's why I didn't say it." She didn't know exactly what to do with that, so she moved on. You said you're not here to dismantle what works. What are you here to do? And he told her. Not in the broad language of the Monday meeting, but specifically, the three divisions he thought were underperforming, the market gap he saw in Meridian's positioning, the acquisition Bernard Walsh had blocked twice, that Calloway believed was actually a strong move. She found herself leaning forward without intending to. She found herself disagreeing with one of his reads on the consumer data and saying so clearly, and he listened and asked her to walk him through her reasoning, and then said, "You might be right. Send me what you have." When she left the office an hour later, Gia glanced up from her desk and said, "That went long, must have gone well." Avianna said, "We'll see. The thing about working with someone you have already met in a different context is that you know things about them you're not supposed to know yet." She knew Calloway Reed had a younger brother he'd put through college. He'd mentioned it in the corridor, in passing, in the middle of talking about something else, the way people dropped real information when they're not performing. She knew he didn't drink champagne, because the Harrington Gala had been serving it all evening, and he'd had a glass of sparkling water the whole time. She knew he thought Bernard Walsh had been risk-averse to the point of stagnation. He hadn't said it that way, but he'd said enough that she could read between the lines. She filed all of this away and pretended she hadn't. They fell into a working rhythm that surprised her. He included her in strategy conversations she would not have been in under Bernard Walsh, which she recognized was partly because of what she knew, and partly because he had read her numbers and understood what they meant. She sent him the consumer data she'd referenced in their first meeting. He sent back questions at 10 p.m. on a Sunday, not because he expected her to answer them that night. He said so explicitly, no rush, just thinking out loud, but because that was apparently how his mind worked after hours. She answered them anyway, because that was how her mind worked too. Waverly watched all of this with the careful attention of someone archiving evidence. "You're being weird," Waverly said one morning, leaning over the partition with a protein bar, and the expression she used when she had an opinion she was choosing her moment for. "I'm working. You're working more than usual, which is saying something, because you already worked more than any human person should. The Pinnacle launch is in 6 weeks. The Pinnacle launch has been in progress for 4 months, and you were not like this 4 months ago." Avianna did not respond to this. "I'm just saying," Waverly said, "that you talk about his notes the way you used to talk about quarterly projections, which for a normal person would not be a compliment, but for you is basically, go eat your protein bar somewhere else." Waverly went, but she was smiling as she went, which was the part Avianna found least comfortable. The Pinnacle launch was scheduled for a Thursday evening at an event space in Midtown. Avianna had been coordinating the logistics for 2 weeks alongside the actual work, which meant she arrived 3 hours early and left approximately nothing to chance. The florals were right. The lighting was right. The display panels were exactly what she had signed off on, and not something else the vendor had substituted at the last minute, which had happened to her once, 4 years ago, and never again. Calloway arrived at 6, which was when the guests started arriving, and he was good at events. She noticed that. He moved through the room without seeming to work at it, and the people he talked to visibly relaxed rather than stiffened, which was not a skill every executive had. He caught her eye from across the room twice in the first hour. The first time was when a journalist from a trade publication cornered her, and he appeared at her elbow within 2 minutes, with a plausible reason for them to move on. The second time she was across the room, and he was across the room, and she looked up because she felt him looking, which was something she was not going to examine too closely. After the event, when the guests had gone, and the catering staff were breaking down the room, she was sitting on the edge of a cocktail table, going through her phone for messages she hadn't been able to answer during the evening, and he came and sat in the chair nearest to her with 2 glasses of water and set one beside her without being asked. "Good night," he said. "Yes, the brand partnerships manager from Whitmore Group wants to talk. She gave me her card. I know, I saw you talking to her. I'll follow up Monday." He looked at her. "Do you ever stop? Do you?" He smiled. The real one, the same one from the Harrington corridor. Point taken. They sat in the mostly empty venue for a while, and she did not feel the need to fill the quiet, which was unusual for her. She was a filler of quiet. She had been told this before by people she trusted. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You asked me that before." "I did. Go ahead." "The night at the Harrington. When you came back from the restroom and I was in the corridor, you could have walked past." She looked at him. "I know. Why didn't you?" She thought about it honestly. Because you looked like you were actually thinking about something. Most people at those things are performing. You didn't look like you were performing." He was quiet for a moment. "What did you think when you saw me in that conference room on Monday?" "I thought," she said, "that I was going to have to be very professional for the foreseeable future." He laughed. A short, real one. "That's it? That's what I let myself think." The room was quiet except for the clatter of folding tables being stacked somewhere behind them. She finished her water. She picked up her bag. "Good night, Calloway. Good night, Avianna." The professional part held is the thing. She was careful. Not in the way of someone avoiding something dangerous, but in the way of someone who had spent 6 years building credibility at one company and knew exactly how much she had to lose. She did not do anything she would not have done in front of the full executive team. She kept the lines where she needed to keep them, but she also knew by December that the lines had begun to feel like effort in a way they hadn't in October. The thing that broke it open wasn't a moment she planned. It was a Tuesday afternoon in mid-December, and she was in the copy room, which was one of the 3 places in the office where nothing ever happened, and where she had always done some of her clearest thinking. And Calloway walked in to use the printer, because apparently their CEO used the copy room like a regular person. And they ended up standing there while the machine ran a 40-page document, and the conversation wandered somewhere she hadn't anticipated. He asked about her family, not in a professional small talk way, in the way of someone who had been thinking about the question and decided to ask it. She told him about her mom in Charlotte, who called every Sunday and always asked the same 3 questions in the same order. She told him about her dad, who had passed 3 years ago, and how she still reached for the phone sometimes on Saturday mornings to call him about something she'd read and then remembered. She didn't know why she told him that. She didn't usually tell people that. He said, "I do that too, with my father." She looked at him. "He's been gone 7 years," he said. "I still think about calling him when something happens I know he'd have an opinion about." They stood there in the copy room while the printer finished its document, and neither of them said anything else about it. And when the document finished, she picked up her papers, and he picked up his, and they went in opposite directions down the hall. But something had shifted, and she was honest enough with herself to know it. She called her mom that Sunday, the regular Sunday call, the 3 questions in order, and at the end of it her mom said, "Something going on with you?" "Work," Avianna said. "Just busy. You've always been busy. This is something else." Her mom had a gift for this. It was one of the things Avianna loved and had always slightly resented about her. "There's someone," Avianna said. "At work." "Oh, it's not. I haven't done anything. I'm being responsible." "I know you're being responsible, baby. You've been responsible since you were 9 years old. I'm asking if you're being honest." She sat with that for a moment. "I'm working on it." Calloway asked her to dinner in January. Not ambiguously. He came to her office on a Thursday afternoon, and she looked up from her laptop and he said, "I'd like to take you to dinner. Not as your CEO. I want to be clear about that distinction." She looked at him. "That's a very clean sentence. I've been thinking about how to say it for a while." "How long?" "Longer than I should probably admit in this context." She should have made him wait. She knew she should have made him wait, because she was a person who thought carefully about decisions and did not make them impulsively. She had turned down things that were good for reasons that were sound, and she was generally at peace with that. She said, "Saturday." He said, "Saturday." The restaurant he chose was the kind of quiet that was not cheap, but was not performing either. No scene, no noise. A corner table where a conversation could actually happen. She arrived 3 minutes early, and he was already there, which she noted without saying anything. They talked for 4 hours. She did not fully understand, until she was home and standing in her kitchen in her coat, because she'd come in and forgotten to take it off, how long they had talked or how easy it had been. She was not someone who found things easy. She worked at them. She managed them. She executed them cleanly and then reassessed. Ease was not something she associated with her own life in any sustained way. She stood in her kitchen in her coat and looked at her phone, and there was already a message from him. "I had a really good time. I hope you did too." She did something she had not done in a very long time. She answered without editing it. "I did," she wrote. "I really did. They dated carefully." That was the word for it, carefully. She told HR before it became anything that could be described as a relationship, which was the professional and ethical thing to do. And the conversation with the HR director was precise and documented, and exactly as awkward as she had expected. Calloway told the board, which was above and beyond what was required and which she respected him for without being willing to say so directly, at least not yet. Waverly, when informed, said nothing for a full 8 seconds, which was the longest Avianna had ever seen her be quiet, and then said, "I knew it in October. Nobody knew anything in October." "I knew it in October," Waverly said again, with the serenity of someone who had no intention of debating the point. What she did not anticipate was her mother. Her mom came to visit in March, ostensibly for a long weekend, actually to see for herself. Avianna's mom was 72 years old and had worked for 35 years as a public school administrator and had opinions about everything. And she delivered them with a warmth that made them impossible to argue against even when they were wrong. She met Calloway, on the Saturday evening of the visit, at a dinner that Avianna had specifically not billed as a meeting, but which everyone understood was a meeting. Her mom shook Calloway's hand, looked at him for a moment in the assessing way she had, and then said, "Avianna tells me you work too much, Mom," Avianna said. "I didn't say that as a complaint. I work too much too. I'm just saying she did mention it." Calloway said, "She's right. It's something I'm working on." Her mom looked at Avianna, then back at Calloway, then she said, "Well, let's sit down." The dinner lasted 3 hours. Her mom asked Calloway 12 questions that sounded like conversation and were actually an interview, and he answered all of them without performing and without deflecting. And when it was over, and Avianna walked her mom back to the guest room, her mom sat on the edge of the bed and said, "He's good, I know. He looks at you like he's paying attention. Not just when you're talking to him, when you're not." Avianna sat down beside her on the bed. "Your father used to do that," her mom said. "I used to catch him looking at me from across a room, and it would embarrass me every time, even after 30 years. Avianna didn't say anything. "Don't be so careful you miss it," her mom said, not unkindly, the way she always said true things, directly, without cushioning, out of pure love. She stopped being quite so careful after that. Not reckless. She didn't have reckless in her. But the version of herself that had been managing the situation, measuring and assessing and keeping a specific kind of distance, she let that version rest. She let Calloway into the parts of her life she usually kept compartmentalized. He met Waverly properly, over brunch on a Sunday, and Waverly was on her best behavior for exactly 22 minutes before she said, "Okay, but I need you to know that she cried once about a quarterly projection and I kept that secret for 3 years, so we're good." And Calloway said, "Wait, which quarter?" And Waverly said, "Q4 2022. And Calloway said that quarter was genuinely rough. And Waverly leaned back in her chair and said, "Okay, I like him." The Whitmore Foundation Gala came back around in late October. Avianna had gone last year reluctantly, because Waverly had gotten tickets through a friend. This year she was on the guest list, because Meridian was sponsoring a portion of the event, and she arrived with Calloway, and they stood in the same ballroom, with the same floor-to-ceiling windows, and the same deep gold evening light. At some point he said, "This is the corridor." She looked up. They were standing just outside the main ballroom, where a year ago she had stopped walking and looked at a stranger and decided on a half-second's instinct to say something. "I know," she said. "I think about that a lot," he said. "That you almost didn't stop." "I almost didn't." "What made you?" She had thought about this. She had turned it over a number of times, in the way she turned over problems she wanted to understand. "You weren't performing," she said again, what she had told him before. "I see a lot of people perform. In boardrooms and in ballrooms and everywhere. You were just there, actually there." He looked at her. "And I was very tired," she said, "of standing next to people who weren't actually anywhere." He took her hand. Right there in the corridor, with people moving past them in both directions, and the sound of the gala carrying out through the ballroom doors. She let him. The following spring, she was promoted to Chief Marketing Officer. Calloway had recused himself from the vote, which was correct and which she had expected. The board voted unanimously, on the basis of 6 years of results, and one of the most successful brand campaigns the company had run in a decade. When it was announced, Waverly sent a single text at 7:43 in the morning. "I knew it in October." Avianna called her mom that Sunday, the regular call, the 3 questions in order. When they reached the end, her mom said, "Happy?" She was standing at her kitchen window. Outside, the city was doing what it did, which was continue. Traffic and noise and the particular aliveness of a place that never fully stopped. "Yes," Avianna said, and meant it without qualification for the first time in a long time. "I really am."